Give us a little background on your personal life, where you were born, when you were born, you know, your town, how you grew up, things like that.
I was born in Wisconsin, northwest Wisconsin, in 1926, and I went to school, all the various schools there in where I was born, and then subsequently World War II came along, so that's when I started to get involved with the Army.
Okay, and were you in high school when the war started, or had you already graduated?
No, I was in high school.
Okay. Were you aware of what was going on overseas prior to Pearl Harbor? I mean, you're aware that the Germans invaded Poland and later into France?
I was very much aware of that. My father was in World War I, and he followed it closely. My grandfather, who lived next door, followed it very closely also. So yes, I was fully aware.
So can you remember the day, and I'm sure you do, when you finally heard that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor?
Oh yes. I remember that. We were having a rehearsal for a Christmas effort at the church. And I came back from that rehearsal effort, went home, and turned the radio on, and that's when I got the first word on the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor.
And when you graduated from high school, did you join the Army, or did you wait till you were drafted?
No, I enlisted. Mm-hmm. I did not wait until I was drafted.
Okay. And when did you enlist?
I enlisted in January of 1944.
1944.
Right.
Okay.
So I was 17 at the time.
17. And where did you do your basic training?
At Camp Joseph T. Robinson, Arkansas.
In Arkansas. And can you kind of describe a little bit of the things that you went through during basic training, how the Army back then took a civilian that didn't know anything about the Army into a soldier?
Yes. Well, they started from scratch with the usual close order drill. And unfortunately, while I was in college for a quarter, I also had to take ROTC at that time, so I did the close order drill, or learned much of it at that time. So when I got to basic training, they looked at me and said, well, you know what you're doing, and so I became a temporary squad leader at the basic, during the basic course.
And how long did that last?
The basic was 17 weeks.
And then after the basic training, you were sent to the 70th?
Yes.
And when did you join the 70th?
On the 10th of October, 1944.
So you joined them at Fort Leonard Wood probably when they were getting ready to get shipped overseas.
That's right. Yes, they had just gotten the word that they were going to be shipped overseas, and we were going to Europe.
Was there a lot of intensified training prior to shipment overseas for you and your company mates?
I don't know if it was intensified or not. I don't think that there was much. I think they just continued with continued doing what they had planned, but private, so I'm not really sure.
Right. So your, I guess, MOS, or your job was as a rifleman, infantryman?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. And I was then shifted to 1st Scout, which is 761 MOS.
MOS. And kind of briefly describe what a scout does for those that may not know what a scout is.
In the rifle squad, which usually leads the rifle platoon in the movement, there are two people, two scouts at the front of it, which are the first ones moving along with it. Mm-hmm. And we have a 1st Scout, which I was, and then you have a 2nd Scout who usually moves 10 to 15 paces behind. Mm-hmm. And so between the two of us, we kept an eye on what we could see out there, and when we got shot at, we went down together, and the squad leader started doing his job. So
you basically became the eyes and ears for the rest of your squad and perhaps the platoon at some point.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Eyes and ears is a good way to describe it.
Can you describe the movement of the division and what you had to go through from Fort Leonard Wood to Massachusetts?
Yes. At Wood, we went through a whole series of making sure that we had everything that we were supposed to have as far as clothes and equipment was concerned. And we went through a numerous number of inspections. Different people would come to do the inspection and make sure we had it.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and we had to mark our clothes in a certain way. We had to mark our belts with, I think the last 4 digits of our Army serial number,
Mm-hmm.
and also our boots. And the purpose, of course, was that if you got all busted up with some shelling, and there was anything left, maybe the boots or the belt or something,
Right.
for identification, of course.
Okay. Once you got to, and did you took a train from Fort Leonard Wood to Boston? Is that correct?
That's right.
And rail movement, I guess, was the primary form of transportation back then to get people and troops shifted from one point to another across
Right.
the United States.
It
Can
was,
you describe what it was like on that train? Can you recall anything about how you guys were situated in that and how you were bunked or anything like that?
Yes. Well, there was, of course, the regular seats, coach seats, but also for movements that went overnight, and we didn't go overnight on the way up to Boston. That was, or maybe we did. Yeah, I think we did.
Mm-hmm.
Right, one night. There were bunks for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the seats and things in the car simply could be turned into bunks,
Mm-hmm.
and for the night, and they're very comfortable and worked well.
Was it pretty packed?
Yes, but there was sufficient room for everybody. I mean, it was packed tight. Yes, but
Okay. And so once you got to Boston, I guess you guys stayed there for a couple of days prior to loading up on the transport, the ship?
yes, we went to Camp Miles Standish first, and we went through more inspections for equipment at Standish. And as I recall, we got some more shots, inoculations.
Right.
And then we were there for 3 or 4 days, and we were going to be shipping out on the ship. The 274 was going, and the day that we were supposed to ship, no, the day before we were supposed to ship, we were out, we were told, okay, what you're going to do today is to clean up the bachelor officers' quarters. And so we were there at the BOQ doing the cleaning of that thing when they came through again and said, wait a minute, the whole thing has changed. There's a new outfit coming in. We don't have to clean this up. Go back to your barracks. So I went back to the company, and the company that I was in, which was L Company, was selected to stay and clean up the regimental area after the thing was over. So the regiment moved out, I think, the following day or so, but our company stayed, and we went ahead and cleaned up the regimental area, and then another savior came along and said, the new outfit is coming in, you guys won't have to do that.
Okay.
So we had about a week off with really nothing to do. We took some trips into Boston and up to New York, that kind of thing.
I'm sure there was like I guess a news blackout
Yes.
for security reasons. Did you try to, in some form or fashion, to try to contact home, just let them know you were okay, that kind of thing?
There was a telephone center,
Mm-hmm.
but it was monitored, the conversations, and we were briefed frequently on, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about that. But I did call home a couple of times. Matter of fact, I called home and said, hey, I'm going to be here another week, I'd like some money. And my parents mailed me some money, so we had the good time. And what the long and short of it was, and since we stayed the week, we did not go overseas with the regiment, but we went overseas with the remainder of the with the other two regiments when they went. We went on the USS West Point.
Just as an aside, can you recall what your pay was as a private PFC back then?
Yes, I was getting $21 a month.
$21 a month.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was after your laundry stuff was taken out. That was a standard fixed fee, and it wasn't much, a couple of bucks. But
And then, as a soldier, also, did you not get hazardous duty pay? I guess is what they would call it today.
not at that time.
Not at that time.
We got once we got to Europe and got the combat infantry badge, then we got $10 a month for that.
Okay. All right. So you boarded which ship with the other two regiments? I guess that would have been the 275 and 276.
Yes, the 275 and 6 went on the Mariposa. We went on the USS West Point,
Okay.
which was it was a larger ship. Not that that makes really any difference or not, but it took the same time to travel across the Atlantic, through the Straits of Gibraltar, and on up to Marseille.
Can you recall the conditions on that ship?
Yes.
And I imagine you were bunked pretty tight.
We were, the bunks were stacked 5 high. And if I happened to be in a top bunk, so I didn't have anything over the, but if the guys in the bunks below me had the bunk, had a bunk over their head, which was probably about this much room between their nose and where where the bunk was.
Can you recall the routine that you went through for 10 days, or were you affected by the sea? Did you get seasick? I'm sure there was a lot of people that did.
Yes, a lot of people did. I did not, for some reason or other. I enjoyed it and spent most of the time out on decks, and we would play cards and so on the deck. And there was some PT on occasion and some abandoned ship drills. And we always, when we were out on deck, we always had to have our life jackets
Right.
with us.
Right. Can you recall if there were any escorts, or did the ship sail alone at the time?
It sailed alone. I think the Mariposa sailed alone also, but I know the West Point did. But they were fast ships and did not need an escort. We picked up an escort when we were not too far out from Gibraltar.
Right. Okay, so you cross the Straits of Gibraltar, you finally see the coast of France. What were your thoughts, if you can recall them, as you neared the coast and started getting off the ship?
Yes, well, I was very interested in passing through the Straits of Gibraltar because, of course, in school we had learned about those, and we found it a very interesting thing. And I remember one point we were when we were first starting to pass through it, the ship's loudspeaker said that now on your left you will see the Straits of Gibraltar and the guns and that kind of thing. So everybody that was out on deck, both the decks, all of a sudden went over to the left side of the ship. And that really made the ship tilt, and they told us, hey, get back to where you were. To straighten the ship up again. And of course nothing serious happened, but it may have, I guess. They were concerned. But then we passed through the Straits, and the thing that I also found interesting was that down on our right, we could see the coast of Africa in the distance. And of course I had never seen Africa before. So we weren't really close, so we couldn't see detail, but enough so that we were aware of what we were looking at.
So you finally dropped anchor, the ship dropped anchor outside of Marseille. Everybody was taken to Marseille. I think you guys spent some time at CP2, is that correct?
Yes, right. I think everybody that went through the route that we did, I have seen in other divisions' books their references to CP2. But yes, and it was very rainy. Most of the time, not all the time, but when we set up our pup tents and the shelter halves, and kept them in a nice row. As a matter of fact, they weren't nice enough to begin. The row wasn't good enough to begin with. We had to tear them up and put them back. But we did get that done, and then we trenched them so that the water would go around us rather than passing through the tent.
So it was rainy and cold. So you got a little foretaste of what you didn't know then, but what you would probably go through for the next couple of weeks.
We did indeed, yes, right. We also, while there, I guess we were there about a week, I would say. We visited a couple of little villages at a time, and that was our first really contact with the French.
Mm-hmm. What were your impressions of the French at that time? I guess for the first time in Marseille nearby. I don't know if you got a side trip to Marseille, anything.
Well, they were always very friendly people. They had children with them, and the children always, we would give them gum, kaugummi as they called it, gum and candy, that kind of thing. And of course the adults were appreciated getting cigarettes, which we gave them too.
Mm-hmm. So I guess you drew your equipment at that time too. Your whatever you didn't take with you overseas. They issued you.
We took everything except, as I recall, weapons on the ship.
Mm-hmm.
But I suspect we must have drawn something, but nothing particular that I recall.
And so you took the 40 and 8s up to the front. Kind of describe the conditions on that train, the trip up to the front.
They had, at least ours had, about 4 to 6 inches of straw on the floor, and it was already getting cold by that time. This was December, and the doors they usually kept open, or we could close them partly, but they were open somewhat. We were getting cold drafts of air coming into it. As we moved along, occasionally the train would stop for breaks, maybe refilling water, I don't know, would stop. And we would get out and walk around. One time we saw an oil drum, and it had been cut in half. And some stovepipe. So we picked up the oil drum, banged a hole in it so we could put the stovepipe in, and we actually set up the stove inside the 40 and 8. And we would pick up wood and coal along the way as we went. So we had some heat in there, which we needed, but basically it was quite cold.
Do you recall the day that you finally started digging a foxhole, I guess, and okay, I'm here, this is it?
Yes. We went first to a sort of an assembly area, school that we lived in for a while. That's where we drew our ammunition and probably bayonets, other equipment. And what was the question again? I'm sorry.
Recalling the day you finally arrived at the front and you're digging your foxhole, and you're thinking, this is it.
Right. We stayed at the school, and our platoon leader and the NCOs did recon on out front, and so we were very interested in what they had to say when they did come back, finally, when we were going to move out to go to an assembly area, we did march along a road, and we would see dead Germans laying there. We would see equipment. I also remember seeing a steel helmet, American steel helmet, and the thing looked like it was inside out. It really, and that shook us up a little bit. You know, we thought that the steel helmet was kind of invulnerable, I guess. But then from there we moved on further and were given a mission to move up on a hill, take some high ground, and we went up unopposed. But we were to hold that because they said that the Germans were going to be flushed on out through this area, and we were to either capture or take them some way. And so we did have, at that time, that was the first time we had to dig holes. The ground was a little frozen, but not down very far. With our entrenching tool, we could break through it. Some of the guys thought they were going to have trouble getting through, but it turned out not to be a big problem.
And this was probably the coldest winter in 50 years at the time for Europe. As a GI, and the equipment that you had, how did you stay warm, or did you stay warm?
We didn't freeze to death, but it was extremely cold, and the warmest we got was when it came our turn to sleep. You know, there were always enough guys, 2, 3, 4 guys in a foxhole area, and so that at least one would be on guard all the time. Mm-hmm. So that meant you could get some sleep, and when you slept, well, you just pulled the blankets over your head. Every GI carried 2 blankets, and you matched up with another guy, so you had 4 blankets. You had a shelter half to put on the ground, put the blankets on, and with those 4 blankets and another body right there, it was comfortable enough to sleep. That was not a problem. Where we got cold, Steve, was and frozen, was when we had to be out in the air during the daytime. Mm-hmm. And I remember that the gloves that I had, which were leather-backed gloves, the seams somehow or other split on them, and that winter the backs of my hands all turned black because they were frostbitten so many times. Mm. And I did not gain recolor until out in August of that summer.
So you basically fight your war with black hands, just frozen, just trying to recover the whole time, and fighting that on top of the Germans.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah. So December 31st, Hitler launches his Operation Nordwind. Mm-hmm. Can you recall where you were when that happened and the firing really got cranking pretty heavy?
I've forgotten the name of the little town. We were, the squad that I was in was given a mission of putting up a roadblock. Mm-hmm. At this point, they had indicated that there were the Germans were on the move, and also that they had found some parachutes, German parachutes, so that we should watch for that. So we set up a roadblock on the edge of this small village, and just waiting for the Germans to come. And sometime during the first night that we were there, actually I should say that there was a house close to the village, and the squad that I was in was actually billeted inside that house. But there was then those of us who were on the roadblock, we took turns taking care of that. Were set up out on it, and that's where we, of course, dug foxholes and that kind of thing. We had to dug our foxholes so we could see right on down the road and watch anything coming. And when we were there for a while, it was getting a little dark, I guess. Yes. I all of a sudden. My buddy and I were out doing guard duty in our foxhole, and I heard some crunch, crunch, crunch coming down the road, coming toward us. And so we had a BAR that we could use there, and so I set that up, and as a matter of fact, cocked it, and watched the road, and all of a sudden, here comes 4 or 5 guys. And they had on soft sort of wool caps, and I was about ready to start shooting, and I thought, look, so you better hold off. And it turned out that they were French. They were from the FFI, and so I was sure glad that I didn't overreact on that thing. Mm-hmm. They came up to us, and we halted them, gave them the password, and the way we worked it all throughout the country was that we had a password to use with the Free French, with the FFI also. And that worked very fine, and they were relieved that we were friendly, we were relieved that they were friendly, and they came over and we chatted for a little while, and then they moved on away.
Okay. Can you recall your first instance where you were in combat?
Yes.
Can you describe that a little bit?
We were, it was a little while after this, we were given the mission of moving up on top of a hill. And so, as it turned out, part of the company, part of the platoon, moved around one side, and the squad I was in, we moved around another side. And as we were walking up on the hill, we started to get fire from the Germans that were up there. We could hear the bullets snapping, but they were over our heads. In other words, we could walk without, we could just hear it, and every once in a while a branch would come falling down on us, a small branch that a bullet had knocked off. Mm-hmm. So we knew they were there. We could see it. We couldn't see the individuals, but we could hear them, and we could see these branches coming down. And so we then got up onto the top of the hill, and I looked over to my left, and here there was a bunch of Germans. I would say about 2 squads, probably a couple dozen, dug in. They hadn't seen us yet. So we got into a line of skirmishers, lined up, right to left, as the custom is in our practice, and started moving out and on them. And at first they started to shoot, and we immediately started shooting back. And they had a machine gun. And most of their weapons were automatic type weapons, but we managed to overcome them, and they surrendered, and we took them prisoner. And I remember I was appointed the guy to take them down back to the company, mm-hmm. Which I then did.
Mm-hmm. Briefly describe the the terrain in the Vosges that you guys had to contend with.
Yes, it was mountainous terrain, not sharp peaks, but lots of ridges. And it was heavily wooded with pine trees. So, and you really couldn't see too far into it. But I remember when we were moving along in the line of skirmishers, I was, of course you kept an eye on these guys who were dug in, but they started to surrender. So I looked a little further on, excuse me, mm-hmm. and into the wood line, and then I saw some Germans who were just walking along and sort of looking at what was going on. One of them one of them was an officer. I know you could tell by the cap that the guy had on his head. But he didn't stick around very long. He kind of took a look at us and then ducked back out of sight. And then the guys that were with him all disappeared. Mm-hmm. But what we did was before I took the guys back, we searched them, which we had been taught to do, and looking for papers, maps, that kind of thing. And then we got that done, and I took them on down to the company.
And so you were involved there, I guess, for the next 2 weeks, trying to stop the German offensive, counteroffensive.
Right. It was 10 days or 2 weeks that we were there. Yes.
During that time, what were your impressions? What kind of the caliber of the German soldier? What were your impressions at that time once you had the experience?
Those guys that we found up there when we were moving through in this line of skirmishers were very, looked to me like they were very old soldiers, old men. But when we captured them, they readily surrendered. They took their steel helmet, threw it as far as they could pitch it, and put on a soft cap. They were glad to be captured. Mm-hmm. And of course, for them, the war was over. And several of them immediately pulled out pictures of their wives, children, that kind of thing, and were very friendly in that regard. Mm-hmm.
So I guess the determination from the early years was gone by that time.
It appeared to be, yes. Yeah. Right. We did not have any problem on guys being over-determined.
Right. Now, and some units of the 70th did face German elite troops, the SS, the mountain troops. Did you run across, did you encounter any at that time during those the couple
I
weeks?
don't think so, not that I know of.
Okay. After the 10 days, 2 weeks, what was the process then? Did you guys, now from what I understand, you kind of had to readjust the lines and do, I guess, what they call a strategic withdrawal, or straighten up the lines, that kind of thing. When you got the word that was happening, what was running through your mind at that time, just from your perspective?
Well, as far as I was concerned, it was just a new mission. I really didn't have much of an idea of the big picture. If we were apparently giving up, I learned later, some of the ground that we had fought for before, but at that time it didn't. I didn't realize it.
Yeah, I just want to make a point, and maybe you can elaborate on it a little bit, that for a GI in a foxhole, his point of view is basically what's in front of him to stay alive and his buddies. He has no concept of the guys in the back office saying, okay, this is what we need to do.
That's right. That's absolutely right, yeah.
Okay.
You just went hour to hour, you know, day to day, and what you were told to do by your NCOs and officers, that's what you did.
Right. You finally got moved back, you're in your new positions, and then I guess during this time also, the special troops of the 70th, of course I didn't know if you were aware of or not, they were coming in also, so where were you at when finally, okay, the Task Force Airman was dissolved and the 70th, okay, you're fighting as a division now?
Yes, we did get the word when the division artillery and the rest of the special troops came in, and we were very pleased because we had problems getting artillery support when we were attached to like the 45th or the 63rd and so on. So we figured, well, at last we're all together again, and it certainly, we could see that we were getting artillery when we needed it, that kind of thing. We had the little artillery aircraft up in the skies that were buzzing around, so we were getting much better support.
So it felt good to finally knowing you can call on your own guys.
Pardon?
It felt good knowing you can call on your own guys for support.
That's right, yes, absolutely.
Were you assigned any missions, or your unit, once the 70th was together? I think they started offensive operations division like February 6th or 7th in that period. Were you involved in any of that? And I guess the terrain started to become a little bit different. Now you're instead of these small mountain towns and heavily hilled terrain, now it's kind of evening out a little bit. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. And also about that time, I was my platoon sergeant came around and said, Jim, you're going to be transferred to the regimental headquarters company. And it turned out that the regiment was forming a guard platoon for protection, you know, to guard the CP, the command post. And so sure enough, the next day I was taken out and moved to it, so that was the last that I had been with L Company. I then went to the regimental headquarters company.
And what did you do at the headquarters company? What was your job description there, I guess?
Right, we were, they called us the guard and guide platoon, and we guarded the command post. In other words, set up, you know, foxholes were necessary, but usually a foxhole was not necessary. We just set up posts around to make sure that there was no infiltration into the CP. And then when the regiment moved, they used us for guides on the road to guide the trucks on through.
Okay. The 70th captured Saarbrücken. They've gone through Forbach, many other smaller towns. You're finally in Germany. Did the mission change a little bit once you got into Germany and crossed the Saar River, from your perspective?
Yes, it did. As a matter of fact, you know, in the combat, they have what they call the light line for vehicles. In other words, when the vehicles arrive at a certain point toward the front, they must turn off their lights and have the little small lights that they had on.
I guess they called them cat's eyes or something?
Cat eyes, that's right, exactly. So the light line was moved beyond us. In other words, when the vehicles came by, they could have their lights on. And we knew when, under those circumstances, that we were quite safe and in pretty good shape.
What was it like once the 70th went into reserve, once they got basically cut off by the joining of the 3rd and 7th Army? What became the 70th mission then, and from your perspective?
Well, they actually became occupation, and we were then parked on the Rhine River, and as a matter of fact, our mess hall was a former German boating club. It was very nice, very nice area. The Rhine was pretty, you know, and it was flowing on by us, and when we really didn't have to worry about an enemy coming through to attack us at that point. We were so far in the rear. So we just provided local security for the headquarters.
Okay, and so I guess other units, were involved in guarding bridges, looking for maybe bands of dedicated German soldiers, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I suspect it was. Since I was in the Guard and Guide platoon, my activities were pretty much restricted to regimental headquarters company.
Do you recall where you were when everybody got the word, hey, the war's over, the Germans have surrendered?
Yes, sure do. We were in Biebrich, Germany. And we heard it on the AFN radio first, and so we walked on outside, and all of a sudden the regimental band came down the street and playing you know, our usual martial music, and it was of course in celebration of VE Day, which had finally arrived. So obviously we were very happy. But we were living well, and our only concern at that time, Steve, was that we were told that you can expect to go to the Pacific. And that was a concern for a while, and then it was decided to drop the atomic bomb, and VJ Day came, and we had, everything was over.
Yeah.